week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Firstly, an apology for sounding a bit croaky, but I've just about sort of got over a fairly heavy cold or flu or whatever it was this week. But anyway, doesn't seem to have impaired my ability to smell and taste whiskey. So thought, well, why not? I'll carry on as normal. Anyway, so yes, a big thank you to everybody that liked last week's episode of the show. Certainly got some nice comments from Lady of the Glen. They seemed more than happy with my reviews of their stuff. So yeah, big thank you to them and to anyone that's gone out and purchased a bottle. So that's really cool. As I was a bit ill this week, I didn't have an awful lot time to sort of consider and put together an episode of the show, so I thought let's do some new stuff, some more new stuff that's come my way. Maybe not quite so sort of new as the Lady of the Glen releases. I think most of these were bottled mid-tail end of last year, but earlier this month I got sent a nice email from Lauren at Global Whisky saying, here's our latest list, is there anything on it that's of interest? If you'd like samples, give us a shout. And it's always nice when that happens, and when you have a considerable list of bottlings that are available, you sort of like think, well, don't really want to take the piss here, you know, and by and large, you know, I will look at a list and, you know, I'll request samples of stuff that either look interesting on paper, or more importantly, sort of things that I would be more than likely to purchase if the sample was good enough, shall we say, or shall we say ticked all the boxes, as opposed to being good enough. But and so, you know, one is a bit, you know, doesn't go too nuts on these kind of things, because, you know, like I said, you know, you don't want to sort of take the piss and then turn around and order anything, you know, which is unlikely. I mean, I have obviously tasted and done an episode of the show on the Auld Goonsy range. You know, I'm not a big fan of this kind of made-up kind of character, but I have to say that, you know, you guys, the general public, seem to quite like the whole concept. I mean, certainly I've had the bottles on the shelf in the past, and they've certainly sold. Also helps that the prices are pretty good as well. I mean, when I was looking at the, I didn't make a note of the cost prices. I can remember some of the retail prices roughly, and yeah, they're pretty damn good, you know, considering how expensive whiskey is at the moment. So anyway, I kind of asked for a number of samples, which, ta-da, I have here. I tend to, you know, from going to sort of ask for samples, I'll ask for about half a dozen or so, and because it's always nice to sort of be able to sort of do an episode of the show with them. It's all good advertising, isn't it, at the end of the day? So yeah, that's basically the whole premise of this week's episode of the show. As they're all cask strength samples, one's butt is full again. Oh yes, I know. Puerility rules, as they say. Anyway, obviously don't need to say too much about Global Whisky. I think I've introduced them in the past. So let's just take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so another Blair Athol. Yes, so after last week's interesting Blair Athol, this is another possibly interesting Blair Athol. This is a 9-year-old Blair Athol. Right, it's bottled at 57.7% and has been as a single new wood hogshead. New wood hogshead, what the hell does that mean? I mean, this is the thing about single casks, is that sometimes the purchaser doesn't really know what the hell it is. I mean, I've had conversations with independent bottling companies over the years, and you know, the bill of sale or the receipt or what have you will just basically say hogshead or something of that ilk. You know, won't specify whether it's an American oak hogshead, a European hogshead, an ex-sherry hogshead, etc. They kind of have to figure it out, and of course sometimes, you know, these hogsheads have been reused sort of like, you know, a number of times and don't really impart very much in the way of character, so you sort of don't really know at the end of the day what the hell it actually was. So when it says new wood, I mean, that could mean it's any form of the different quercuses, I suppose. It could primarily be American oak, but it could be, it could be Latvian oak or sort of Andean oak or whatever. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's kind of a bit of an irrelevance at the end of the day. But so it's a single cask. It's 3806,579, distilled in June of 2013 and bottled in April of last year. Bottling number 2 is a first fill bourbon hoggy, a Dailuaine, an 11-year-old Dailuaine, distilled in March of 2011. Again, bottled as all of these were in April of last year. Cask number 303861, bottled at 56.1%. Now, there's like a lot of the independents, they have sort of, the standard kind of, well, I wouldn't say standard, American oak age bottlings, and then some weird and wonderful cask finishes and what have you. And it's always fun to just try them, just to see, because you never know, sometimes you come across them and they are just wonderfully balanced. Other times they're a little bit too heavy. But of course, until you've actually physically tasted them, you've got no idea at the end of the day. So, moving on to number 3, this is a first fill port hoggy finished in Inchgower. It's a 13 years old, cask 811028, distilled in November of 2009 and bottled in April of last year at 58.7%. Now, as we know, Inchgower, fairly light, sometimes quite innocuous spey, and also, in colour, reasonably heavily sort of orangey, I suppose, to a certain extent. So it's possible that there's not going to be an awful lot of distillery character there, if any at all. Excuse me. Then we're going to move on to another port hoggy finish, first fill port hoggy finish, and this time it's an Auchroisk, 13 years old, cask 812965, distilled in September of 2009 and bottled at 54.5%. Auchroisk, again, can be quite variable, is similar in essence sometimes to Inchgower in that kind of like citric-y, sort of green fruit kind of spey, sometimes shows a bit more weight. Possibly sort of certainly stands up to sherry relatively well, or I have tasted good sherry finished Auchroisks. So anyway, let's see what that one turns out like in due course. Then we're on to a 13-year-old Mannochmore, this time finished in first fill Amontillado sherry casks, cask number 9321. Again, distilled in September of 2009, bottled April 2022 at 57.1%. Again, Mannochmore, another one of those kind of like, well, what sort of character does Mannochmore kind of have? And it's another one of those whiskies that you often see finished precisely for that reason. Am I being a bit hard on these distilleries? And finally, it's a Caol Ila, and this again, first fill Amontillado. You see, I kind of like worked this out in my head. I thought this would be quite interesting. So yes, this is a 9-year-old Caol Ila, bottled at 58.4%, cask 319941. Distilled in August of 2013 and like all the rest bottled in April of 2022. And although I can't remember the exact retail price off the top of my head for a Caol Ila, which can be stupid money, it's actually pretty good value. And anyway, we'll obviously find out whether it's the taste is good at the end of the days to match that that retail price. So anyway, so that's the lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Blair Athol then, shall we? As it's been some time. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Blair Athol. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's a nice nose. It's fairly oaky. It's got, quite a fair amount of sawn wood. It's not quite sawdusty, it's that sort of sawn wood kind of character. There's some lime, some gooseberry, a little bit of spice, some weight, some barley, some oiliness, some oily white fruit. There's no industrial notes, there's no sort of hardness to it. It's kind of pretty much what you would expect from a Blair Athol. Now, like I said, there is a relative amount of oak, but I think the alcohol is kind of keeping that in check, and overall I really like the balance of it. It's got distillery character, it's got some oak character, a little bit sherbety, I guess. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying overly confected, but yeah. Let's see what the pals like. Grippy, oaky, but it's got some lovely full, rich apricot, dense white fruit, barley, a bit sawdusty, quite noticeable alcohol on the mid palate. I mean, you really do feel it, and it does mask the finish quite a bit, but it's got a nice kind of floral, but not kind of overtly flowery. It's kind of more pollen, floral finish to it. Again, that white kind of like is very prevalent throughout the whole sort of experience. It's certainly, like I said, kind of classic whitey Blair Athol. Let's see what a little drop of water does to it. Okay, that's softened the nose a little bit. Maybe not quite so much oak now. It's kind of toned it down a little bit. I'm getting more fruit, sort of more of the apricot, lemon. There's a slight sort of almost kind of nettly kind of note coming through now, which is starting to move into that sort of almost kind of menthol character, but it's not overt menthol. It's really quite pleasantly complex for a 9-year-old spirit. And now, if memory serves me right, this is going to hit the shelf about $49.95, I think, just under the £50 mark, which, considering the cost of whiskey these days, it is very, very good value for money. I mean, you know, long gone are the days when, you know, sort of a sub 10-year-old whiskey, even at cask strength, was going to come in at 30 something odd quid. That ain't going to ever happen now. But getting something under the 50 notes mark, yeah, really well priced. Let's see what the pals like now. That's lovely. Succulent, juicy, a real mouthful now. The alcohol has subsided, the oak has subsided, loads of honey, malt, apricot, fleshy fruit, white fruit, pear, bit of peach. Well, it's just a beautiful palate, it has to be said. I mean, you know, it's got a lovely complexity. It's, like I said, it's classic Blair Athol, as you would expect without any sherry. It's got that weight, that density, that depth, and all round, I think that's a very, very impressive cask, whatever it was. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 11-year-old Dailuaine. So, first fill bourbon. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Ooh, that's a bit of a riot, it has to be said. It's kind of Dailuaine like I've never come across it before. It's really fruity, I mean really estery. It certainly seems that first fill American oak has kind of really kind of pulled out loads of estery, almost pineapple, banana. I mean, there's sort of elements of Mackmyra here, or sort of, you know, old Mackmyra. Apple, peach, bit of cinnamon, touch of grippy spice, a little bit of fat corn. Yeah, alright, okay, so it's kind of, again, got quite a fair amount of oak character, but again, not to its detriment. It really is quite, you know, pretty good for Dailuaine. I mean, you know, Dailuaine can be quite sort of oily, but I've never come across such a fruity Dailuaine. I mean, it's not a sort of a word that I would ever use to sort of describe Dailuaine. Estery, fruity, no. Oily, full, interesting, possibly. Sometimes a bit dull, maybe. But that's far, far from dull. It has to be said. Let's do a pass on. Grippy, earthy, barley, but again, estery, fruity. I mean, if I was tasting this blind, I'd be thinking, we're possibly Glencadam maybe, or something of that kind of ilk. It's that fruity, but it's all kind of contained. There's spice. There's also a tautness there. The cask, the sort of cask strength is kind of keeping it kind of like from being, you know, overly bubblegummy, although there is a slight element of bubblegum there. Again, some lovely gingery spice notes on the finish. I think that's pretty impressive. And like I said, it's not what I was expecting at all. And this is one of the fun things about sort of whiskey, is every now and again, you know, casks will throw you a total and utter curveball, and you'll go, wow, you know. Which is why you then need to buy them, because you go, wow, I've never experienced this before from a whatever, you know. Anyway, let's see what the nose is like now. Okay, so it's kind of dampened down the sort of overt fruitiness a little bit. It's a little bit more juicy, a little bit more kind of juicy fruit, you know. There's more sort of apple, barley, oily malt now. It's a bit more sort of what I would expect from Dailuaine, but it's still got quite a fruitiness. It's a lovely nose. Let's see what it passes on. Again, they're really juicy, succulent, lovely citrus notes, lime, lemon, touch of green fruit, but it's got that bedrock of dense apricot, and again, maybe not quite so estery, not quite so fruity, but really full. And again, you know, it's just a lovely mouthful. It's a really good whiskey at the end of the day. And like I said, neat. It is pretty unusual. I can't say I've come across a Dailuaine quite like it. And that one really hits the mark, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first fill port finished Inchgower. We're on a bit of a roll now, so let's see where we go with this one then, shall we? Okay, it's very raw. It's not that soft and fluffy kind of port finish. It's that sort of manure-y, earthy, decomposing straw kind of character. It's got a bit of a sort of a herbally sort of eau de vie kind of note. It's a bit green fruit. It's a bit of a difficult one to love, it has to be said. It's quite astringent, quite hard, but not in an industrial way. It's probably the alcohol that's kind of giving it that astringency. But like I said, it's not kind of soft and sort of succulent and juicy kind of port. It's kind of like pretty raw, stinky and manure-y kind of port, you know. Bit of vanilla. Yeah, that's a hard nose. That's what the part's like. Wow, that's masked. Herbal, astringent, again, very much like the nose would suggest. Sort of manure-y, raw, black fruits, bitter oak, bitter tannins, green wood, it's a tongue ripper and a half, it has to be said. You know, that's, and a throat ripper as well. If I wasn't croaky enough. Yeah, that's difficult. That's a hard one, it has to be said. Let's try a little drop of water. Let's see if that actually softens things up. It may well mitigate some of that alcohol, and we might get some juicy fruit. Then again, maybe not. It's still pretty raw and astringent, it has to be said. There is a softening there around the edges, but certainly not enough to sort of like say, yeah, this is a definite sort of buy me kind of bottling. Yeah, I mean, it's porty, you know. I mean, you get what it says on the tin, I suppose. And it's, like I said, it's a real kind of raw port cask as opposed to a sort of soft and fluffy port cask. See what that's like. It's still pretty raw and green, it has to be said. There's a bit more sweetness there, but it's a bit confected. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a mess, because it isn't. But it's not a sort of a sort of a lovely malt. It's a kind of, I've got to work at this. This is a hard work kind of malt at the end of the day, and it's sort of like not something that's really appealing to me. Again, I don't think the price was too bad. I forget now what it was going to retail for. And if you like your kind of port finishes with that sort of element of rawness and sort of you know, tongue ripping ability, then brill, you'll love it. You know, for me, I just want a little bit more fruit. You know, I want a little bit more softness. You know, it's just a bit too hardcore for me. Okay, so let's move on to the second of the two port hoggy finishes. This is the 13-year-old Auchroisk. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, so that's more what I would expect, or more want, should I say, from a kind of a port finish. It's soft, it's fruity, black red fruits, red currant, barley, a little bit of gooseberry, some vanilla. I mean, it's still natural, in inverted commas, but not as natural as the previous bottling. There is a softness there, a fruitiness. It's not kind of like assaulting myself with a stringent sort of fruit. There's some syrupy notes, and it's kind of, it just goes to show how you can have a similar type of cask and they just will mature in a completely different manner. And maybe this actually had more of the port left in the staves, possibly, when it was filled. I don't know. It's again another one of those conundrums, isn't it? But I can tell you that it certainly has less rawness, less tannic character. It's softer. There's more black and red fruits, like I said. Okay, I'm not getting a huge amount of Auchroisk character. There's a little bit of barley and there's a little bit of gooseberry, possibly. So the balance is just about there. I mean, it is skewed more towards the port. But you know what? I mean, I like that. I think it's actually quite an appealing nose. That's what it sounds like. Soft, juicy. Again, lots of that soft, succulent black and red fruits, a little bit of spice, touch of barley, vanilla, pepper. I mean, again, it's got a lovely fruitiness to it. It doesn't quite have the rawness of the previous bottling, which is good. It's got more fruit. It's more fuller. It's a lot more enjoyable to drink. It certainly doesn't have that astringency. Maybe the slightly lower ABV has helped. In that, you know, it's certainly not a tongue ripper at all. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. I suspect that's going to make it probably even more fruity. or we'll see. Yeah, it certainly has. It's kind of like brought out more of the port cask on the nose. It's certainly more sort of black fruit, touch more pepper. There's a little bit of menthol, possibly a little vanilla, sort of milky vanilla. Yeah, I think that's a lovely nose at the end of the day. I mean, if you like port finishes, I would much prefer this to the previous one, to the yeah, it's just softer, just a lot more easier to get on with, I think. Let's see what the pass on. And like the nose, soft, juicy, a little bit more syrup notes, quite chocolatey, a little bit of barley, a little bit more sort of distillery kind of sort of grassiness, I guess. Green fruit on the finish. A little bit of a drying tannic aftertaste, but it's not overly tannic. It's just kind of like sort of giving it a kind of almost kind of biscuity, spicy kind of finish to it, you know, sort of crumbly, digestive biscuit kind of note right on the very end of the palate. I like that. It's a little, possibly a little bit more moved towards the dark side, I would suggest, but certainly sort of the two portwood finishes, or the two port hoggy finishes, that is by far and away the more successful of the two, I think. Right, okay, so moving on to the Mannochmore. So first fill and Montolado finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, that's quite intriguing. Nutty. Quite high tone, almost kind of grain spirit, kind of dried fruit, sultana, a little bit of rose oil. Okay, I'm not getting a huge amount of Mannochmore, whatever Mannochmore's character actually is, but it's not a stonking sherry monster. It's quite a subdued, sort of nutty, slightly spicy sherried character. A little bit of green nuts, a little bit of minerals. Okay, yeah, I can live with this, you know. There is more to it than just a sherry, but it's more of a sort of an intimation of something else, some kind of barleyed notes, a little bit of granulated sugar, possibly. Yeah, it's appealing. I mean, you know, I don't hate sherry character at all. I don't hate sort of sherried whiskies. As you well know, it's all about the balance, and yeah, I can live with this. Let's see what the part's like. Chewy, nutty, malty, dried fruits. Again, got that sort of high tone, slightly sort of grain-like, sort of sultanery kind of character. A little bit of tannin, quite masked, not getting a great deal on the finish. I mean, it's 57.1, so it's not a surprise. It's got a lovely mouth-watering aftertaste, but that's probably more to do with the alcohol than anything else. Possibly a slight floral note there, maybe. Yeah, I like that. I mean, it is, again, a bit like the Auchroisk, maybe slightly further to the dark side than one would overtly want, but it's not so far into the over into the dark side that it's never going to come back. Let's see what the nose gives us on it now. Quite floral now, actually, quite aromatic. Still quite cask orientated, but it's got that lovely aromatic quality, that sort of nutty aromatic quality, and maybe maybe it's because it's not a thumping Oloroso monster. It's not all dried fruits and sort of, you know, sort of dark chocolatey tannins. It's possibly just slightly more appealing, maybe. I don't know. I do seem to find, if I'm going to have a sort of like, you know, a fairly heavily sherry influenced whiskey, I often find myself gravitating to sort of like, you know, Amontillado or Manzanilla or Fino even. Maybe it's just because you just don't see them so much, you know, maybe because it's sort of Oloroso finishes are just so bloody ubiquitous. Touch of tea leaf possibly. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Sweet, juicy, succulent, incredibly easy going, it has to be said. I mean, that just slips down. There's a lovely kind of not quite syrup, sort of golden syrup maybe, that kind of character. There's a little bit of spice, bit of potpourri, a little herbal note. Again, lovely nutty aftertaste. It basically says Amontillado to me, more than Oloroso. It's not quite so dark and intimidating and all that kind of stuff. And although yes, it is more, like I said, towards the darker side of the spectrum, I still think that's actually quite pleasant if you sort of fancy dabbling with the dark side. That is. Right, and on to the final whisky of the afternoon. So this is the 9-year-old Caol Ila, again first fill Amontillado finish. Let's see what those gives on the end, shall we? Ooh, that's a lovely nose. Green barbecue smoke, smoked meat, tar, mentholated fruit, nutty sherry, more greenwood, more tar. I mean, you know, it's kind of peat and sherry at the end of the day. Although there is a sort of a complexity going on here. It's not, again, it's not a monster. There's a bit of scrubbiness. There's a so that's smoked meat. I don't know what it is about sort of that sort of smoked meat character in whiskey that really does it for me. That sort of barbecuey sort of smoked meat. You know, it's kind of you know. And then you get that little bit of burnt wood, that scrub, that tar, that juicy kind of dried fruits. It all just works just so well. I mean, you know, so what is not to like about this nose? And like I said, I forget what I would have to retail this for. But it's not an inconsiderable amount of money, considering some Caol Ila can be just stupidly expensive. And I just remember sort of saying to another independent bottling company that sent me a sample of a young Caol Ila, probably something a similar kind of age, yeah, and that would have to retail or would have gone on the shelf at what, 70-80 quid. And I'm thinking, why? This is Caol Ila. This is not bloody Lagavulin, for God's sake. And there's buckets of Caol Ila about. It's not like, you know, you can't find it. And yet this is, well, I can't remember, 60, I forget, 50, 60. All I can remember is saying, yeah, that's good value. Barbecued meat, give me some. That's what it's like. Menthol, astringent green wood, green fruit, bitter tannins, barbecued meat, again green wood smoke, tar, green apple, salt, a little bit, no, quite a bit actually. Didn't really get that on the nose. I think that's probably spent more time on the mainland than on Islay, to be honest with you, but mineral saltiness on the finish and the aftertaste, a little bit masked. Again, some lovely nutty sherry, but that's that barbecuey kind of character, that sort of wood smoke, that sort of barbecue sauce. Ooh, that's good. that really is quite impressive, it has to be said. And you know, it's Caol Ila. I mean, you have to go somewhat to cock up Caol Ila. I mean, obviously Caol Ila can be cocked up, if you remember. You know, I did an episode of the show not so long ago on some rather sort of more, yeah, less than perfect whiskies, and there was a bit of a dodgy Caol Ila there. So it does happen, but you know. Not from this one, it has to be said. This is lovely. This is kind of meaty, still quite barbecuey, probably even more barbecuey, more sauce-like, you know, more kind of, yeah, it's just barbecue sauce, lime, gooseberry. Oh, that's a lovely nose. I mean, if you love your sherried Caol Ilas with character, with nuance, with lots of barbecue sauce, then this is your baby. See what the bottle's like. A little bit more heavily on the Amontillado character now, the sort of more sort of nutty, still quite barbecue, still quite smoky, a little bit less salty now. I'm getting less of the coastal character, which again seems to indicate that it probably spent more years on the mainland than it probably did on Islay. But yeah, that's not to its detriment. It's still quite interesting, still quite smoky, still quite barbecuey, and still quite lovely. Right, okay, so it's on today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Lauren at Global Whisky for the samples for today's episode of the show. Your continued support is very much appreciated. The Blair Athol, yep, I kind of like that. New wood and everything. It was. I think it needed a little drop of water, just kind of tone everything down. But at the end of the day, it was kind of classic, sort of rich, oily, sort of Blair Athol. The Dailuaine, unusual. I mean, you know, overly fruity, really estery, quite Mannochmore in character, which for Dailuaine quite unusual. Drop of water with it, it's more kind of what you would expect from Dailuaine, but still a lovely, rich and juicy, succulent whiskey at the end of the day, so no problem with that whatsoever. The Inchgower, well, you can't argue that it had a naturalistic character. Probably a little bit too natural for my liking, it has to be said. There was just a little bit too much astringency, a little bit too much manure and sort of decomposing straw, and not enough sweetness. On the other hand, the Auchroisk was more kind of, to me, textbook sort of port finish. It was a lot softer, a lot sweeter, a lot more juicy fruit, a lot more black fruit, less of that kind of a straw and raw and eau de vie and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was just, you might argue that it's not as natural, that it's a little bit more sweeter and confected possibly, but if you want drinkability, I think, you know, the Auchroisk had it more so than the Inchgower. The Mannochmore, yeah, okay, it was one of those kind of like, not really entirely sure, but it's sort of, you know, one of those kind of whiskies that, you know, there are people out there are customers that sort of like a good dollop of sherry character, and this is I've got no problem with selling that. You know, it's not an overt sherry monster. There is some distillery character sort of happening there. I think the balance is just about right. I like the nuttiness of the Amontillado, and yeah, I'm more than happy with that. And the Caol Ila, yep, that ticks all my boxes, it has to be said. Yeah, if I'm going to do sherry, I may as well do sherry with peat, and with lots of barbecue sauce. Thank you very much. And smoked meat. Lovely. Absolutely lovely. And I'm sure that if that's kind of the sort of thing that that floats your boat, you'll enjoy that as well. And it's not too expensive either. Like I said, I forget the retail price of it, but you know, I remember looking at the cost price and thinking, yep, that's a pretty good price. It has to be said. So at the end of the day, I have to say that the pricing structure that sort of Global Whisky are using is just really consumer friendly. I mean, you know, very, very consumer friendly, considering what they probably could chuck them out at. And yeah, let's raise a glass to that one. So yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hopefully you've really enjoyed it, and you will, like, you know, previous episodes of the show, maybe search them out. I think they're fairly widely available. Certainly a certain whisky merchant has some of these in stock. Yeah, hopefully next week I won't be quite so full of cold. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.